MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles on SpencerFernando.com. Happy New Year, Spencer, and welcome back to the show.
Happy New Year. Good to be here.
Spencer, Iranians are rioting. The government is shooting people. They claim police officers have been killed in these riots. Why are people in Iran so upset? So upset that they'll demonstrate in a country that clearly doesn't like people to speak out against it?
Well, it started off as really an economic protest. There's some cities in the country have unemployment rates as high as 40%, so there's serious economic problems. But what you're seeing now is that people, there's been a long kind of simmering dislike for the theocratic Islamic regime there, and the protests are now about everything. It's not just the economy. It's saying get rid of the regime, get rid of the dictatorship. So I think people are, the economy may have triggered it, but people have had enough of being oppressed and controlled, and many people there are not putting up with it anymore.
Now, is this really the fallout from years and years of sanctions placed on them because of their atomic program?
I think that could be part of it. I think the other issue is that the revolution there, the so-called revolution there, was always a bit of a fraud. I mean, what happened is you had a dictator who was more kind of Western, secular Western-backed, and he was overthrown. And when that took place, the Islamists and young people and socialists kind of formed a coalition to overthrow it, and then a lot of people on the left thought that they were going to be in control. But what happened is the Islamists, as they usually do, got rid of all their opponents and took complete control. So there's always been a lot of resentment in the country at their revolution being really hijacked and taken away from them. And I think some of that's coming out now.
And perhaps the government forgot, too, that the original revolution that overthrew the Shah was by university students. And when university students get behind a movement, it seems to have a lot of momentum because these aren't stupid people.
No, I mean, Iran's always been an interesting country. It's, the United States and many Western countries are very close to the government of Saudi Arabia. But many of the people of Saudi Arabia have views that are so different from Canada. Whereas in Iran, it's almost the opposite. We're enemies with their government, but many of the Iranian people are very pro-Western and very, we can relate to them a lot better. So we'll see what happens. I mean, the regime at this point doesn't look like they've lost the support of the military, and if they don't lose that, then they'll probably stay in power. But they have a weaker hold than many people thought.
Is one of the reasons why Iran is having these problems is that they're spending so much money supporting revolutionary movements elsewhere, promoting terrorism?
Yeah, that has been one of the big things that a lot of protesters are saying is, we have cities with unemployment rates of 40%, there's lots of poverty, people can't find jobs, people can't make money, but why is the government sending billions to basically terrorist organizations around the world? It's terrible priorities. So it's interesting. I mean, it kind of echoes what we saw a little bit in the United States election where people were saying, when they're suffering in our own country, in the States or anywhere else, you shouldn't be spending money on other countries. So we'll see what happens.
Well, in Canada, we have the same thing. We have thousands of homeless people across the country, and yet Canada spends billions on foreign aid. And I hear from my neighbors who say, how come we can't house our own homeless and look after people with dire illnesses that the government refuses to fund? Why are we spending money overseas? It's not like Canada is a big international power.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think government foreign aid should be eliminated entirely. I think people, if they want to give to, causes around the world, that should be a personal choice. But it makes no sense that the Canadian government takes money from Canadians and then gives that money to other countries. I don't think that's what the government's supposed to be about. That's not what taxpayers are supposed to be paying for, and it needs to come to an end.
Well, doesn't Prime Minister Trudeau give millions of taxpayers' dollars to the Aga Khan's foundation?
Yeah, he's given a lot. I mean, in fairness, the Harper government did as well. I don't understand why. I mean, the Aga Khan said some nice things. Doesn't seem like a bad guy or anything, but he's very wealthy. I mean, he doesn't need government money to do the programs that he's working on. And, you know, we have many people in our own country, seniors in poverty, veterans who are homeless, you know, people in serious trouble, many reserves or third world conditions. And the idea that we're giving money to, you know, a super rich guy with his own private island, so he can do some feel-good stuff around the world doesn't make much sense to me.
It also seems weird to me that we have a government that still is fighting in court, giving veterans the same benefits that other people did who fought in the Second and Korean Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, the government only tries, the Trudeau government especially, only tries to save money when it comes to veterans, which is, you know, it's disgraceful. And, you know, what's interesting is they came up with this, you know, this big, hype, you know, the veterans, pension, you know, lifelong pension. Oh, they're going to bring it back as they promised in the campaign. And then the benefits are, in most cases, much less than what they were before. So I don't see why it's so tough for the government to just say people wanted to go back to the old benefit system and then bring it back. That's not a difficult thing to do. And yet this is the one area where they want to save money.
Right, and these are people who have volunteered to put their lives on the line to protect the country. Shouldn't they be getting, I mean, I think they should be getting the same pay and benefits as MPs.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you have to serve longer in the military to get a much smaller pension than politicians get for serving just 6 years in Parliament. And they're not in any danger. I mean, they're not putting their life on the line. You know, many of them, and, you know, they'll even say it themselves, many of them gain a whole bunch of weight once they get in office because most of the time they're sitting around eating or going to events and getting food given to them by all these people. So why should they get treated better than people who actually put their lives on the line? You know, it's terrible.
We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after the break.
Glance Technologies owns and operates Glance Pay, a disruptive mobile payment technology now live in 16 cities in Canada and about to launch in the US. With revenues up 664% in the last quarter, Glance Technologies has the potential to be a worldwide leader in an industry projected to grow to $1.3 trillion in 3 years. Glance Technologies stock symbols are GLNFF in the US and GET in Canada. Find out more at glancepay.com.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, what kind of fallout do you believe there's going to be with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau being found guilty of being unethical, the first sitting Prime Minister to be found so?
Well, I think it's definitely going to dent his image. I mean, he campaigned as someone who was going to, you know, clean up Ottawa and, you know, change things and run. I know they said over and over again, the most open and transparent government Canadians have ever seen, and then he becomes the first Prime Minister to be found violating ethics rules. So it's definitely going to put a dent in their image. I mean, it's going to be, I mean, Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives, and I guess the NDP as well, are going to have to keep bringing attention on it. News cycles are pretty short, and the Liberals will be hoping it goes away, so they're going to have to keep bringing it up.
Now, on the issue of veterans, I don't think the Conservatives can say much about what the Liberals are doing.
Yeah, you know, the Conservatives didn't really do that good a job on it. I mean, they talked a good game, but they didn't do much for veterans either. This is one area where all parties really failed. The new Veterans Charter was brought in, was introduced by Paul Martin, and then implemented by the Conservatives, and then changed by Trudeau, but to something that's not really a big improvement for most people. So, yeah, I mean, this is a problem with the whole political class in Canada. You know, they say all the nice things about veterans, and then when it comes to actually supporting them, they don't do anything at all. So that definitely needs to change, and it's only going to change if Canadians are outraged about it. I mean, politicians get away with whatever they can unless they're going to lose popularity. So Canadians need to keep speaking out.
Well, it's probably because our armed forces are so tiny. We only have something like 3,000 infantry personnel. You could put the entire Canadian Armed Forces into BC Place Stadium and have lots of room left over.
Yeah, it's been badly underfunded. I mean, if you look at, as a percent of GDP, we're at about 1% now, 0.9%. They tried to recalculate it to make it look, I think, like 1.3%, and then said, oh, we're increasing spending. But it's a tiny amount. It's not even close to what even the NATO average of 2%, which is what they're striving for. And, people, the problem is if you look at world history, things can go wrong in the world very quickly. And since you don't know what's going to happen in the future, you have to be prepared for it. And that means having a stronger military. We have lots of resources, lots of land to cover, and we're not doing a good job of it.
Well, it seems to me, too, Canada has something like over 200 generals and fewer than 60,000 troops to command. In the U.S., I mean, a division is 10,000 guys, and they only have a colonel in charge of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why do we need over 200 generals?
Yeah, it's definitely become a top-heavy bureaucratic institution. And that's often what happens when there's no, if you look at people in the Canadian military, there's not too many who are serving in government now, and that's, I think, a big problem. Aaron O'Toole is an exception, and I've actually heard good things about Aaron O'Toole from many Canadian veterans. They said if he had been able to stay in there longer, some of them felt he could have made some improvements, but the Conservatives lost and now the Liberals are in. But there's not really the voice of veterans heard too often in the Canadian government, and that's I think, a serious problem.
Well, I mean, we are lucky that we do have a serious veteran in charge of the armed forces, but who has lots of experience out in battle, but it doesn't seem to be translating all that well.
No, I mean, it's not just having a minister, I mean, which, should be helpful, but in the bureaucracy itself, the people who actually implement the programs, there's not too many veterans in the I mean, Veterans Affairs, in all honesty, should be run mostly by veterans. Like, it should be headed up by a veteran. The minister in charge of it should be a veteran. Unfortunately, you just have bureaucrats who are implementing a program, and they're trying to save money, and it ends up hurting veterans. So, yeah, I mean, Harjit Sajjan, it should be benefiting veterans, but we haven't seen too much of that so far.
Absolutely right. I mean, veterans need jobs. Why aren't they doing the jobs in Veterans Affairs? That probably would look after most of their needs.
Well, yeah, there was a program, I think the Conservatives brought it in, that was about helping find jobs for Canadian veterans in the civil service. And then it turns out the Trudeau government hasn't been tracking whether they're actually hiring people. So they have no idea whether the program's working or not.
Well, that seems to be a problem with most government programs, is the lack of tracking.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember the Conservative government running ads on television saying we've doubled the penalties for polluting the West Coast. However, the same ads didn't mention the fact that they had laid off everybody who enforced those laws.
Yeah. Well, so much of it is just about image, right? They do a poll, and they say, oh, Canadians want us to do this, and then they just put out a press release, say we're doing this, and then they don't actually do it, and hope that people just read the press release and think it's happening. So, I mean, that's where the media has to come in, right? I mean, the media, I've noticed, seems like they become a little better in some cases with Trudeau, but their coverage of him is still, I think, a little too positive. Well, not just a little too positive. It's quite, if you compare the way Harper was covered. I mean, imagine if Harper had been the first Canadian Prime Minister found guilty of violating an ethics statute. I mean, he would have been just ripped to shreds for weeks and weeks. It would have been the biggest scandal of all time in the media. Trudeau does it, it's a few-day story, and then they move on to other things. So, definitely a double standard there.
Well, perhaps it's because of the way the two different camps treat reporters. Harper, during the Olympics, I was going into a photo op. I was armed completely only with a camera to take a picture of the Prime Minister, and I was kicked out of the photo op because I might ask a question. And during the entire time of the Olympics in Vancouver, Harper did not hold one news conference, not one event where you were allowed to ask him any questions. Prime Minister Trudeau, on the other hand, is Mr. Selfie. I thought he had a pretty positive wave when every time I looked on Facebook during the election campaign, there's Trudeau posing with people at work, at the picnic beach, out on a park, jogging down the road. I mean, and he still is a very much a hands-on, go ahead, let's hug kind of prime minister. And even on the mother-in-law's 90th birthday, Harper sent a 3-line letter that said, "Congratulations, you're 90." Trudeau sent a 6x10 glossy picture, "Best of love, Sheila, hugs and kisses, Justin." So, you know, he's a guy who doesn't mind being touchy-feely, and I think people like that because you could never imagine Harper, shaking his kids' hands when he took them to school instead of giving them a hug or a kiss.
The one thing the Liberals have done very well is they've definitely mastered image politics. I mean, they know how to, it lets them get away with a lot of stuff. I mean, the policy isn't even there, but the image looks good and, it helps them keep a certain level of support. I mean, the Conservatives, what's ironic about it is, when Harper would do a press conference, he was actually quite good. I mean, he was one of the most well-read prime ministers we've had in a long time, very knowledgeable. He could speak pretty well. For whatever reason, he hid away far too often, and, people, in a vacuum, the media is going to come up with a lot of things that are negative, right? So if they don't feel they're being treated well, or if they're not hearing a message every day, then they're going to create their own message, and it's often going to be negative. So, yeah, that's a big reason why he lost. Trudeau beat him in the image game.
Well, when it comes to imaging, Trump and reporters as well, when he badmouths you, as a reporter, I don't feel all that good about the guy. And if I can, if you're going to say negative things about me, I think I'm going to find negative things about you. It's just human nature. If somebody spits in my face, you really want to spit back.
Yeah, that's a part of it. I think it's a bit of a different dynamic with Trump, though, because he has, such a strong following on Twitter. He doesn't need the media to the same extent. He can kind of go around them. And to be honest, I think it's a bit of a game that he and the media are playing. I mean, he benefits because he gets to be fighting the media, and the media benefits because, they throw his name on a headline and they make tons of money on views. So I think if you could talk to some of those reporters and executives and even Trump, I think there's a bit more of a game going on there than some of them might admit.
Well, I'm sure that perhaps some people would laugh afterwards. Hey, that was a tough question. Well, I gave you a tough reply. If you're professionals, you can laugh about it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are some people who take it personally. We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after this.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO, on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario, with grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program to test numerous targets located by recent groundwork is planned for early 2018. Please visit our website at rmroyalty.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, the U.S. tax package went through. Guests on my show have pointed out there are so many serious flaws with this. It'll take years to clear them up. But the attitude that went with the tax cuts was so positive that companies were giving their employees last-minute $1,000 Christmas bonuses. In Canada, the tax rates, if you take a look at them just on the face of them, we're very competitive. In some places, still lower than the U.S. However, the attitude that goes along with the government and the taxes doesn't seem to be the same at all.
No, a lot of people, I think, if you're a business and you're looking to invest, look at not just the current situation, but the trends. The U.S. looks like they're trending towards a more a friendly environment for business, whereas Canada is trending the other way. And so I think people are going to, and the other thing is the U.S. is a much larger market, so if all things are considered equal, then most companies will go to the U.S. if the tax rate is pretty similar. Canada used to have a very large advantage, so that could overcome the fact that we're a smaller market. But I think, it's not good for Canada if we don't make some changes because, it's not tough for business to just head over across the border. It's not a big challenge for them. And if a lot of them do that, then we're going to lose jobs and we're going to lose investment, and that's not going to be good for the country.
Well, we've already seen small businesses that are energy dependent move from BC into Washington State because all BC and Canada do is impose new carbon taxes. They went up today. In the U.S., the government has made it clear they are not in favor of carbon taxes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's kind of ironic because Canada really has no influence when it comes to the amount of pollution in the air because it's mostly China, the United States, India, and China, for all their good talk about fighting climate change, is still building a bunch of new coal plants, not just in China but around the world. So that would totally outdo anything we do. So by putting a carbon tax on, we're just punishing ourselves.
Well, yes. What other country in the world has such resplendent and plentiful carbon energy resources? BC, over 200 years, proven reserves in natural gas alone. We don't even have to frack.
Yeah, it's, there's also a lot of ignorance around, just what kind of country Canada is. I mean, the OECD put together a report saying, Canada has higher than average energy usage compared to other countries. That's a big problem. Well, of course we do. It's freezing cold here. So we have to drive. We have to heat things. It's going to be a lot cheaper in, a country closer to the equator to run your cities and run your economy and run your transportation than it is in Canada when we need to be heating things all the time. And they put out these reports and don't even mention anything about how cold it is. So, there's a lot of ignorance around it, and, our leaders keep feeding into it because they want to look good on the world stage as opposed to helping their own country. So they just say, we need to do more. We'll tax our people even more and punish our own people more just so everyone in the world will like us. So, not good enough.
Well, also, higher carbon taxes, if the idea is to get you out of your car, well, that's fine if there's an alternative. But I still don't see rapid transit out to UBC, Canada's busiest transit corridor. Still don't see rapid transit out into the Fraser Valley. Right here in the Lower Mainland, we're letting the world down because we're not giving those alternatives. But I notice the provincial government has no qualms at all when it comes to collecting the highest taxes in the country when it comes to gasoline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very hypocritical, and it's, one of the interesting things is the lack of rural representation in the government for the most part. One thing you could say very good about the Conservatives is they had a pretty good mix in their last majority of urban and rural MPs. And one of the things that does is people understand that, in rural Canada, you can't be taxing people for having to use a truck or having to drive around, because that's just a part of life. You're going to use a lot of carbon. So there's no understanding of that, it seems, in the Trudeau government. So all the people who, live in the elite urban centers, it's going to be fine for them. But for people in rural Canada, they're just going to pay more. They're still going to have to drive, still going to have to use trucks, still going to have to, travel long distances, and nothing's going to change that.
What should the government be doing? Should there be a different carbon tax rate for rural residents?
I think they should just get rid of the carbon tax entirely. It doesn't seem like a good policy. I think there should be tougher penalties for companies that violate pollution laws. I mean, we have some pretty weak laws in that area. So, make the punishments real and make it a real deterrent. But to punish everybody in the country, with a new tax, history shows governments lie about taxes all the time. They say, we're going to use it for this purpose, or this is what it's about. And then it just goes into general revenue, and they increase spending and say, we need more taxes again. So I don't have any faith that government's going to do anything good with it.
Well, a good example, when Paul Martin was finance minister, at the time Canada was running a $53 billion surplus in the EI fund, and our pension fund was underfunded by about $60 billion. So I asked the finance minister, sir, why don't you take the surplus in the EI and put it in to the pension fund? He says, well, Jim, I can't do that. It's illegal. Sir, you're the finance minister. You could change the law tomorrow. He just walked away. So when you point out the obvious. Also, NAFTA, do you think that these negotiations, which were supposed to be all wrapped up and given to us with a red ribbon on it for Christmas time, are still going on? And apparently they're pretty acrimonious. Do you think that we're going to see Trump walk away from it?
It's tough to tell. There's a lot of division in the U.S., and I think even within the administration. I mean, a lot of his advisors don't want him to walk away from it. Most of the governors, including many Republican governors, don't want him to walk away from it. I think one thing Canada is, at some point there's going to be a book written about the behind-the-scenes negotiations, so I guess we'll find out. But I do think we're being a little foolish by kind of lumping ourselves in with Mexico against the U.S. in negotiations. I mean, Mexico's done a lot of things that have not been helpful to Canada either. I mean, I think 8 out of the last 9 new auto plants in North America have been built in Mexico. Their cheap labor is taking jobs from Canada, taking factories away from Canada, hurting our auto industry. So the idea that we're somehow in solidarity with Mexico against the United States seems like a very foolish move. We'd probably benefit from just having a deal, just a one-on-one deal with the United States and not necessarily having as much connection with Mexico. But that doesn't seem to be where our leaders are going.
Well, the Americans say they want 50% American content in a car. And I watched an interview the other night where a car building expert said it's virtually impossible to tell where the parts come from because they go in and out of the border, across the borders in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. so many times. Plus, you mix in some Asian parts that are necessary and aren't built anywhere else. How do you measure how much of that car is actually American?
Yeah, that kind of strikes me as an extreme position to negotiate down from. No country could agree to that. I mean, that would be a huge blow to both Canada and Mexico. But these are all separate issues. There's the U.S. demanding auto parts, and then Mexico obviously doesn't want to change their labor laws because they have a huge benefit to cheap labor, many people who aren't paid well, so they can undercut their competitors. So there's a lot of different issues going on. But it's Canada we have to be careful about it because we seem to be in a situation where we could end up fairly doing some fairly serious damage to our economy, and we have to be careful about the consequences.
Before we went on air, we talked about a poll that said Canadians now look at China more favorably than they do the U.S. Is that a good view to have?
No, it's not. I think, it's interesting. Sometimes you look at a poll and you can almost sense that the answer is not exactly what people are thinking. And what I mean by that is if you ask people, would you rather live in China, or would you rather live in the United States? Or would you rather have the United States government or the Chinese government? I think most Canadians would pick the United States. The U.S. has flaws. Obviously, there's a lot of concern among some Canadians about their current political situation. But I really don't think people really want to be closer to China. I mean, China is a very different country. It's a different civilization. A lot of the freedoms and rights and things we take for granted here don't exist there. And we have to be careful. I mean, China is very good at playing the Western media and Western leaders. They know exactly what to say, what phrases to use, and then they just go off and do whatever they want behind the scenes, and people often fall for the appearance. So, we have to be careful. The U.S. is, it looks like a chaotic country because they're pretty free, they're pretty open. All their problems and debates happen out in the open in the media. It's controversial, it's loud, it's aggressive. China's got a lot of problems, but they're all hidden away, and people get thrown in jail or even executed for trying to reveal what's going on there. So, very different situation.
Yeah, you might be hauled off somewhere and have your organs donated.
Yeah.
Something they deny doing, but reporters have had relatives organize getting a kidney in Hong Kong in a couple of weeks for $25,000.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing.
Spencer, always fun talking with you.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
My guest has been investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles at spencerfernando.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Any questions for us or our guests can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Have a happy New Year, everybody.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.